because I said the same thing. I said, I've done the 12 steps. I don't want to do it because it doesn't work. And so the person that sponsors me today, Michael G., he said, I'm just going to ask you a simple question, and then we can move on from there. Did you open up at the title page of that book and read to 164, and did you do everything that it asked you to do in between? And I said, well, of course not. Who actually does that? And he said, well, then, you tried, the 12 steps. And I think that that's the fundamental difference. There's, I've worked the 12 steps, and I've tried.
That was Tyler Matheny, one of the co-founders of YANA. Tyler's and my focus in this episode is, in a nutshell, the importance of purpose in your recovery. Now, that may seem obvious, to have purpose behind your recovery, but all too often, time is the only thing that we measure. Hello, I'm your host, MartinJon, the Recovery Mentor, and you're listening to the Recover Yourself podcast, where we address topics you'll face while on a journey to recovering yourself. This podcast is all about expanding the definition and scope of how we understand both addiction and recovery. I'm interested in doing this so everyone has an opportunity to recover themselves. This way, no matter where you are on that journey, there is a place for you here. Finding purpose in our lives can turn into a shallow endeavor. However, when it is, we will always be found out by our ever-increasing desire for external things. More praise or more money, attention or things, and even clean and sober time can be a misguided purpose. Those things are markers or rewards, not purpose. And in this episode, Tyler looks to service work, as expressed in the rooms of AA, as a way of finding purpose. Tyler, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with us.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. So you are a co-founder of YANA. Can you tell me a little bit about YANA?
Yeah, so we wanted to create just basically a exclusive community that was 100% focused on recovery, just to see if there was any interest in people being a part of a community like that. And it turns out that there were. In fact, I would say that there were quite a few women that really, that's what they were looking for. And it's not exclusively for women, but we found that our membership is about 70% women today. And so it started with AA because that's how I got sober. That's what I knew best. I sponsor men that are getting sober through the 12 steps and through AA. But really, we are program agnostic. Our overarching community theme is hope. That's what we want it to be about. I think that there's a million different places and, different people you can talk to talk about a lot of the personal stuff that is going on in your life. But one of the things that really kept me out of the rooms of recovery for years and years and years is the war stories. Because the fact is that my first AA meeting, I was 17 years old, and I walked into a room in a very dimly lit church basement in Bath, Maine, which no one's ever heard of before. And I just remember them, they said, do you have a problem with alcohol? And I was totally freaked out by this experience. And they fleeced me out of $1. But the stories that they told, they were talking about getting their third DWI and, hitting their wives. And, I was 17. I didn't even have a driver's license at that point. And so that lack of identification is what kept me from trying to get sober. And I think the sort of mania and hallmark of my recovery journey is that for, well over a decade, I could recognize the symptoms long before I was able to accept the reality. And that came when I stopped focusing on the external factors in my life, the house, the car, the job, things like that. And how do I feel inside? And has anything that I've done up to this point made my life any better? And that was a resounding no for me. I really felt like, so I'm a huge proponent of therapy. So what I'm saying next is not a knock on therapy, because I think therapy is drastically important. But we spent a lot of time talking about mom, talking about the suicide of my father when I was 14. We talked a lot about being gay. And when all of that was sort of scraped away and we had sort of beat that to death, I was like, yeah, but I'm still drinking and that's all I want to do. And so finally someone much smarter than mine, he said, has it ever occurred to you that maybe you just like the effects produced by drugs and alcohol? And I was like, no, there has to be an underlying cause. He said, yeah, and for some people there are. I think that's the difference between an alcoholic and a hard drinker. Is that the hard drinker, if they can uncover what that underlying root cause is, they can usually stop or moderate. The real alcoholic, the real drug addict that is sort of talked about in the Big Book, which I think Bill Wilson did pretty masterfully, is that no matter how great the wish or necessity, this person will be unable to stop or moderate. And that's the category of drug addict and alcoholic that I found myself in.
Right. And we're definitely looking at this idea of having purpose behind your sobriety. Can you go over the differences between sobriety, abstinence, recovery, as you understand those three different words?
Yeah, so for me, I think abstinence is where anybody who wants to sort of redefine what their relationship with drugs or alcohol is, that's what it looks like, is just the moderation, temporary stoppage of whatever you're doing. I think we're seeing a huge movement of that right now, in fact. I think that there's a lot of people in lieu of, the lockdowns associated with COVID-19 that are trying to redefine what their relationship is with it, that are, recognizing that maybe there's some unhealthy patterns there. So I think most people to one degree or another start with abstinence for any number of reasons. It may have nothing to do with addiction. It could be, religious convictions. It could be, hey, I'm training for a marathon and this is probably not going to help me get to where I need to be. I think then from there is the recognition that it was a problem, that there were some things that you have uncovered, and that leads to sobriety. And for me, sobriety is really being, around the periphery of some type of program of recovery, not really engaged with it, but you're aware of it. You sort of take in the principles and things that are convenient for your life, that are easy to sort of implement, but you're not fully bought in. And then for me, and this to me is the cornerstone of my personal recovery, is living a sober life. And what that means to me is that I spend the majority of my time trying to help others. And for me, that is what brings me joy, and that's what brings me comfort. And so for me, it was really clear. I remember at the time I had about 18 months of sobriety, and I said, I feel so wildly different inside than it seems like a lot of these people do. Why is that? And so I ended up writing a blog post. There was, I would say, probably out of the last 100 people that have signed up to join YANA, at least 10 to 12 of them have referenced this blog post where I said, I tried the 12 steps, they didn't work, and why this is sort of a fallacy in thinking. Because I said the same thing. I said, I've done the 12 steps. I don't want to do it because it doesn't work. And so the person that sponsors me today, Michael G, he said, I'm just going to ask you a simple question, and then we can move on from there. Did you open up at the title page of that book and read to 164, and did you do everything that it asked you to do in between? And I said, well, of course not. Who actually does that? And he said, well, then, you tried, the 12 steps. And I think that that's the fundamental difference. There's, I've worked the 12 steps, and I've tried. And I think that's really sort of true for every recovery program that's out there. Any, sort of modality that a person finds their path to recovery, there's the stuff that's on paper, there's the stuff that you hear, and then there's the stuff that you were supposed to take action on. And I think a lot of people take action right up to the point they sort of take that spiritual condition away, where they start to feel better and they start to feel like they're more used to the people around them, and that they're a better employee and mother and father and brother, sister. And then we tend to coast on that feeling until it goes away, and we end up doing one of two things in my experience. Is I either ended up picking up a drink again, or I ended up doubling down and saying, okay, where am I deficient in my program of recovery? For me, like, I think that whether you got sober in AA, NA, CA, any of the A's, or on your own, sort of thing, this idea of unity, spirit, and recovery is pretty important to me. Spirit is my relationship with a power greater than myself, a higher power of my own understanding. Community is exactly what it says. It's a fellowship. It's people that I can talk to when I'm, doing good things in recovery and when I'm doing things that I need help with. It's people that understand. And that was one of the key things for me, was that I think one of the most powerful things someone who struggles with drugs or alcohol can hear is from another person is, yeah, me too. That piece of identification that you are not alone. In fact, that's what YANA is an acronym for, is you are not alone. And then the last piece that I think is really, really important is recovery. What are the things that I do to make sure that I'm, maintaining a certain level of spiritual fitness? I think that Dr. Bob and Bill W. sort of nailed it when they said you cannot transmit something you don't have. And for me, I tried to do that for a lot in my, journey to recovery. And so those are sort of the distinctions that I make through my own experience. And, I think it's different for everyone, but for me, I try and spend most of my time focusing on, am I living a sober life? Am I being honest in my relationships? Am I being helpful to those around me? Or am I focusing 95% on, what I want in my little plans? And the irony is, the more I focus on others, the more my other plans tend to come together. I think the universe is pretty cool like that.
Yeah. How can community detour us from our path? And And when do we know that it is kind of legit and really helping us?
I think that the fastest way to tell if you are in a community of people that are going to be helpful in your recovery is look how many of them are genuinely happy. If the majority of them are happy, that's probably because they've got the spirit inside of them, that there's, a higher power operative in that group. If they're not, and it tends to be 45 minutes to an hour of mostly people giving a litany of complaints, it's probably time to find a new home group. And I hope that those people find a sponsor that say, hey, I know that the divorce is tough. I know that the trauma you suffered was horrible. But that's, that's not going to fix what's inside you. Do you need to talk about those things? Absolutely. Is that going to change the internal condition? Probably not. And for me, that's what I needed to hear is because I had years of sobriety and I see, why do I feel so depressed still? Why do I feel so anxious? Why do I feel so alone? And a lot of it had to do with the spiritual malady that I had never fully addressed. And I think that, AA, for all of its flaws and all of its successes, they do a pretty good job of painting a picture of what the spiritual malady is, where you don't feel like you're of use to others and where you can't make a living. I mean, you're changing jobs a lot, where, your family and your personal life are in disarray. And those were all hallmarks of, my life, even in sobriety, until I started really focusing on, living a sober life. Being honest, in all of my relationships.
So YANA is a part of your recovery.
So it's an addition to my recovery. In fact, we say, in the terms and conditions, that this is not a substitute for a program of recovery, but rather an addition to it. I think that one of the mistakes we made early on in a lot of these sort of digital communities around recovery is that people thought that if I'm on this app, I'll stay sober. And the reality is that you probably won't. There's some things, that you would want to do. And so the original idea for YANA came from two overarching facts when I was early in recovery. I was very, very lonely, and I was exceptionally bored. I didn't know anyone that was sober. And when I would go out to social events and say, I don't drink, that was a really awkward conversation where I was not comfortable owning my story and say, actually, I'm in long-term recovery. I'd be like, oh, well, I'm on medication, or, oh, I'm this, or, oh, I'm that. And especially living in a city, the live music capital of the world, Austin, there are a million different events each week predicated around drinking, even if it's socially distanced, drinking. And so I thought, what if we could combine the best of an online community, sort of everything that you love about a home group and that sort of sense of camaraderie, and combine that with an offline experience. And so our original idea before COVID sort of took hold and shut everything down was that we were going to host this event called the Great Big Sober Boat Bash. Where we were going to partner with Sans Bar, which is like a local bar here in Austin that is, obviously alcohol-free, and Clean Cause, which is a great energy drink run by Wes Hurd here in Austin. They give 50% of their profit away to help people who get scholarships into sober living homes. Really, really great organization. Because we wanted to have people be able to meet online, but then, put together groups of activities to do offline so that they would feel like they had a social life, that didn't involve drinking. And we started seeing early successes where people would get a group together and they'd go play golf, or they would get a group of folks together and they would say, hey, there's this new Austin bike tour where they go through all the haunted buildings in Austin. Who wants to join me? And those people would then meet up. And so obviously with COVID, we've seen less and less of that, but that's our ultimate hope, is that it can be sort of a part of your daily living, in addition to what you do as part of a program of recovery.
And so talk to me a little bit about how purpose comes into that, and obviously you have purpose. How does community kind of translate into purpose?
So I think that community translates to purpose where, so I'll give you a great example. I have a sponsee that's 2 years sober, and when he came to me, he said, I'm 2 years removed from my last drink or drug, and I've never been more unhappy than I am right now. And as we were sort of going through his story, he had worked the steps, and he had gotten all the way up to step 12, where it says, as a result of having a spiritual awakening, we take this message to others. And so I said, okay, so what do you do for service work? And he said, I loan money to people when they ask for it. And I said, who told you that was service work? Like, what person? Probably someone who borrowed money. Be like, this is your service work for the week. I need $1,000. And I said, I can almost guarantee you that is why you feel the way that you do, is because you don't have anything that you're doing in your program that's of service to other people. And I think I think a lot of people get hung up on that has to be sponsorship, and that is not my experience. You don't have to raise your hand and say I'm ready and willing to sponsor. Volunteer somewhere. Take the trash out at your next AA meeting. Do something, and expect nothing in return. And I think that you'll probably start to feel a little bit better about where you're at. For me, it's really an exercise in values. I think that my experience was that the longer I was around AA and could not get sober, the more resentful I became about my experience in AA. It was AA condemnation as a whole. When the reality is that AA today in most of the groups across the world barely resemble what Dr. Bob and Bill had envisioned when they founded they didn't wait around for 30, 60, 90 days. They said, you have a week sober, you're about ready to do a fifth step, I need you down at the Salvation Army, it's time for you to start working with others. They understood the importance of timing. They understood the implicity of how momentum helps in early recovery. And I think when you are at a luxury treatment center, where the focus is on, I've worked at a treatment center before, I'll take their inventory too. I spent so much time filling out biosexual, social questionnaires and everything else in between that was all about uncovering what the, sort of focal point of the drinking was, when the fact is that I just caught that genetic bullet that makes me different than than other people, that sort of 12 to 15% of the general population that cannot use alcohol or drugs safely in any form. And so with YANA, with the platform, we really say coming out the gate that what we'd like to do is combine the best of science, spirituality, and community, that the collective experience of millions of recovered people shows is effective. We don't jam anything down anybody's throat. I think your journey to recovery is an extraordinarily personal one. It's even hard for me to call YANA a business. People are like, well, who are your competitors? I'm like, well, I think we have to sell something in order to actually have a competitor, and we don't sell anything. This is for free and for fun for anyone that wants it. I pay for it out of my own pocket. Because I thought people would find it valuable.
How can we kind of recognize and bring in a continuing and a never-ending sort of path of purpose?
Yeah, I think that my experience is that even with the people I know that I respect deeply in the program that have 25, 30, 40 years of sobriety, they would be the first one to tell you, be like, I am far from perfect. Even with all the work that I've done over a 40-year period, I still make mistakes. I am still human. I am still fallible. But what it's done is it's put me in a better position to recognize those patterns, behaviors, and recognize what those triggers are for me. So that, and then, outside of AA doesn't talk a lot about coping mechanisms or, how to deal with stress or things like that. It's really predicated around how to put down the drink, how to put the plug in the jug. The sort of context around AA and the 12-step program is really that it's about connecting to a power greater than yourself that will relieve the obsession to drink or use drugs more. Now, I know very well that demon can come right back. And so when that piece was solved, then I had to actually take recognition about even in sobriety, what do the relationships in my life look like? What are the things that I bring to them that are really healthy and really helpful and kind and considerate? What are the selfish things that I do in a relationship? What are those things that I did? Because I think that there's patterns of behavior, and then there's the individual thing that you may have done that was selfish. And usually the individual things, like I could pretty much stop myself and course correct and say, hey, I was really insensitive in the way that I just responded, to you, and I apologize for that. I'm sorry. And then there's other things where, like, I know that I'm doing them, but I know that I'm not in a place where I can change them. A lot of those root causes around patterns of behavior are, psychological, and they're not related necessarily to the drinking or the drugs. And so for me, that's been really helpful and really sort of impactful to my recovery overall. And I'm still not perfect, and I'll never be perfect, and I'm okay with that. I used to sort of think that I had to have an answer for everything. I had to know, and I've become remarkably good at saying, I don't know. I don't have the faintest idea. Give me a little bit of time, I might be able to figure it out, or I may come back in 2 weeks and say, I still don't know. But it's something I'm willing to work on. And so for me, that's sort of been the difference. Is like, let's leave no stone unturned. Let's find out what's really there. let's really dig deep and go through the dark stuff that is hard for me to look at and hard for me to talk about and hard for me to think about. Because at the end of the day, every single person on planet Earth deserves to be happy to one degree or another. I think that, very much so, I manifest a lot of what gets back to me, when I'm spending a lot of time. And I touched on this earlier, when I spend a majority of my time thinking about how I can help others rather than, how can I help myself, then the things that help me and help my career and my family tend to honestly work themselves out. And that's part of, for me, like trusting what, God's plan for me. And so for me, that's a lot of it. Is like, I think that AA can solve quite a few issues for the addict and alcoholic. I think the other stuff is 100% on us, and it's on the communities that we build and on the people that we trust with our story and our journey, and the things that are good about us and the things that are difficult and the things that we want.
Tyler, thank you so much for sharing so much with us, and for building YANA. And we are not alone, and I'm really grateful for any community that is supporting those of us that are on a path to recovery. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's I think that's just one of the important things that, especially right now in COVID, is that I don't care what message they hear, as long as it's a message that told them a piece of truth, and it's one that leads them to saying, I want what they have. I want what that is. And I think that, podcasts have been like remarkably helpful. There's some really, really great ones. I love your podcast. That's actually how I found, how we ended up connecting. And then through Haro, I would just help a reporter out. I was like, I'm pretty sure this is the same dude I follow on Instagram.
I'm grateful for that. I'm super grateful for that, because like when we're out here putting stuff out there, like you don't know where it's landing or how it's landing, or just keep making it, and you just keep like this is my entire life is to be of service. So as you mentioned, I am not interested in those in early recovery as much. I am not interested in sponsoring. I'm not interested in doing that sort of work. But the work that I do is to be of service, and all of the work that I do here online and all of the work that I do in my life is solely that of purpose. So
yeah, and that's one of the things that I really like about YANA, is usually when someone new comes in, it's pretty clear that, as addicts that are newly sober, we tend to wear our emotions on our sleeve. And so it becomes fairly clear what they're looking for. A lot of times they'll reach out to me because I'm one of the co-founders. I'm obviously really active on the platform. And I have no problem saying, you know what, that's like not how I got sober. I don't know the first thing about NA, but I know a couple of people that I would love to introduce you to that know that program inside and out. Would that be okay with you? Or they're like, look, I really sort of centered, my life in the limited amounts of, successful sobriety I found were predicated around Buddhism. I'd be like, oh, you're going to love Dharma recovery, because that's basically 12 steps for Buddhists. And really that's what we want to do, is just provide an honest, insight into what a program of recovery, what a sober life could look like. And then let them make the decision as to what works for them.
I really love how you express that, because one of the big things for me is the people that I work with, the people that I talk to, the people that I support are often mostly people that want to be cartographers, that don't just want to pick up a map, that want to be like, look, I got my own coast, but I have to figure it out. I got to draw this map for myself. And I'm like, right. So I can't tell you go east, west, north, or south, but I can show you how to sail. Once you know how to sail, you can map your course.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that that's a hugely important distinction that you made, that, and one that I try and make, especially when speaking publicly, is that this is my story and my experience. Your experience may be different, and that's totally okay. And I 100% support that. All we can do is show what we found to be helpful to others, what's been helpful in our own recovery journey, but then you get to piece it together and you get to decide what that means in your life, and you can take the things that make your life better. And that's the point. Nobody gets sober and it's like, I got sober because I was feeling awesome, and I wanted to keep feeling awesome. And so so find somebody that you believe in, that you can relate to, that has something that you want, and then just ask them. You'd be shocked most people are really willing to say, here's, what I did. This is how I built the life that I want. I think, like, as an addict, when you shoot heroin, you get the reward center, like, activated pretty quickly, like, immediately. And I wanted that same thing. I'm like, okay, well, I didn't drink yesterday, so why is my life still not great? Well, because you haven't done anything, other than take that very first step, and that is a monumental and a huge one. It's just that first day, and so I like when people make the distinction that this is my story, this is my opinion, and then here's the other side. This is what the literature shows us. This is what other people's experience show us. But ultimately, I can help you build the sailboat, but you're going to be responsible for sailing it. I love that analogy. It's so powerful.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Again, Tyler, thank you so much. I appreciate it, man. I'm looking forward to putting this out.
Yeah, I'm excited. I really appreciate you having me on.
Absolutely. With YANA, Tyler is contributing great work to all of us by supporting people finding their own way. The world can use more voices speaking up about how sobriety no longer needs to look like it used to. Although we need fellowship, our group doesn't have to look only one way. Today, our way is a way of purpose. I mentioned to Tyler in this episode that my life is service work, and since I've done that, I looked around to see how absolutely true that is. And at the center of it is me. I'm not forgetting myself. I'm not putting myself second by being of service. I can say no, and I can give freely. That, for me, has been beautiful to both witness and live. Now, Tyler's doing great work locally in Austin, and I encourage you to check out all that he's doing, especially on his app, YANA. You can find links to everything Tyler is doing in the description of this episode, so please rate and review this podcast and/or leave comments for this episode to help me better create helpful content. Support this show at anchor.fm or support me and my work at Patreon, where you'll get access to unedited content as well as writings and one-on-one access to supporter group portrait sessions with me. I host workshops regularly and take a limited number of one-on-one clients every month, so contact me through MartinJon.com when you're ready to work together. I also accept financial support through Venmo at MartinJon_Garcia. So if you benefit from listening to this content, please consider supporting my efforts. Thank you for listening to the Recover Yourself podcast, and until next time, keep recovering yourself.
So a lot of this is like why we built YANA. So this is what someone would see when they first log in. Some topics around living sober, about meditation, why we built YANA, why it's different. One of the things that it was really important that I needed them to understand, it was a real community, and whatever it becomes today will predicate what it becomes, a year from now. And so if we're a place of hope and understanding, then that's what it'll be. If we're a place of judgment and fear, then that's also what it can be. It's one of the reasons why, since we started it, once a month we hold a town hall where everyone gets to come in and say, hey, here's what we think is helpful. Here's some things that we don't like. Here's some features we'd love to see. And it's not, so some of it is silly stuff. But a lot of this is sort of like predicated around the things that we don't know about, like what is sober dating like? How do we do that? Elise B, I don't know if you know her. She founded a company called The Sober Curator, which is basically like Vogue, but for the sober world. It's all about, her theory is that you can take the girl out of the party, but you can't take the party out of the girl. And so now she's showing people how to like have a really fun, active social life, but do it sober. So she tends to share a lot of things like that. But we break it down basically, like if you're not sure what the platform is, in that first email you get, I encourage them to check out Discovery, where it sort of shows like, here are the people that are on the platform. Here are some things that, can be potentially helpful. If there's a specific topic that they're looking for more information on, we sort of break it down. We are in the process of really sort of assigning people, like Elise owns Sobriety in Seattle because she knows that community inside and out. My friend Alexis owns New York because she's really active in the New York area. I own Austin, the Bay Area. We're going to put someone out there. But really, it's just like we wanted it to be a little bit more fun, a little bit more quiet. YANA Community News. This is basically anyone that's interested in what this community becomes, where it's going, how they can help, and so that's sort of, what we're trying to build. And I think that the next iteration of this, and one of the things that we're going to tackle in 2021 is really sort of is bringing it full spectrum, where we're going to partner with inpatient facilities that don't have an outpatient component and have a completely online intensive outpatient component that's centered around living sober. It's less about, talking about, your relationship with mom and dad. I think that those things are critical components of really sort of understanding the mechanics of those impactful relationships. But not in the first 30, 60, 90 days. Those are things that, are still going to be there, in 6 months, 18 months, 2 years. Those are things that, in fact, one of the things that I had to fact check this speaker, but he said the word recovering occurs in the big book 1 time. And I said, that can't be right. I've read that book 1,000 times. That can't possibly be right. And he was, and it's in the family afterwards, where we're always going to be recovering with our family and the people that we've harmed. But everywhere else it says we've recovered from a seemingly homeless state of mind and body. And so, I think that, a year from now, YANA's probably going to look fairly different from what it looks like today. And I think that that's going to be 100% community driven. And what the community says is helpful.